And on Zoom, we have with us Wisconsin's 65th Assembly District Representative Tod Ohnstad, and he's going to join us today and has made a commitment to join us during the ongoing crisis when he can to give us an update as to what is going on legislatively and to help us through this difficult time. Tod, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm okay. Everything's good so far. Thanks for having me on today.
Well, thanks for coming on. I think it's very important during this time that we start to hear from the people that are representing us and try to get a feel for what's going on in Madison as well as here in Kenosha. And of course, right now you're at home, sheltering in place in your little home office. It looks like, correct?
Yep, I am.
And how often are you guys getting up to Madison right now during this?
Well, actually, it's been a few weeks since I've been to Madison. I will be going next week, but the Capitol is actually closed down to the public, so there's very little activity there. Most people are not only not there themselves, but our staff is actually working virtually from home as well. But I'm in contact, of course, with my staff every day, and on particular constituent problems. We, of course, are having a lot of people with unemployment problems. Different agencies, DHS, a lot of concerns. So our staff actually is, even though they're not in the building, are probably busier than ever.
Sure. This has moved from just
there's. It seems like every day there's a couple of webinars that we are invited to in terms of what's going on in different agencies. Different secretaries are holding a webinar. It seems a couple times a day, and we, of course, are caucusing virtually as well. So between the constituent work and the everything that's going on in the Capitol, we're certainly busy during this period of time.
Now, of course, in Wisconsin, we are kind of beholden to the country as a whole and the guidelines that are being set forth by Centers for Disease Control and by the federal government, as well as trying to take things down to the state level and break it down. And this has evolved from just a public health crisis to an economic crisis as well. Which one do you think is a greater threat to Wisconsinites right now?
Well, I think that they are both a great threat. And, let's just look at some of the numbers in terms of both the statewide numbers and the Kenosha numbers in terms of people who have been affected. I read in the paper today that we had another casualty, another death. That puts us up to 7 in Kenosha County, 311 cases, and that's up 52 cases since Monday. In the state, we've had 5,052 cases as of yesterday, with 257 deaths. Looking at it nationally, I think it's safe to say that, unfortunately, 1 week from today, that we will have more people lost their lives due to this virus in a period of 7 or 8 weeks than we lost American soldiers in 15 years in Vietnam. And I think that is an amazing perspective, that that the damage has been that great. And obviously, we have a great economic crisis going on as well. We have, I believe the last number I saw, approximately 26 million people laid off, mostly as a result of the coronavirus. So it's a hard balancing act.
I agree with you. It's a very difficult balancing act because one death is too many if it can be prevented, and if it couldn't have been prevented, then the economic damage is too much for not preventing deaths in the first place. And I think we've come to a point here where we're not sure on the science because it keeps changing. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think the science keeps getting more and more perfected. I'm not so sure that changing is the right word. I think that we're learning more about the virus as we go along.
Well, yeah, science changes as we know more. So I'm not saying that the scientific principles are changing, but the data that we're getting is changing the forecasting.
Yeah, I think that's true, and nobody wants this to go 1 minute longer than what it has to go. But I think that we have to be very, very careful in terms of opening up early. You probably saw the recent polling where 61% of the people think that the lockdowns that are in place now are appropriate. We all want to get back to whatever the new normal is going to look like as soon as possible, not 1 minute later. We have businesses. I've been in contact with a lot of different business people, and some of them are, of course, frustrated that they were not able to participate in the first round of small business loans. Now the Congress just passed a new bill yesterday, so we'll certainly be analyzing that over the weekend and into Monday to see exactly what that will bring. I don't believe that the president has signed it just yet, but as soon as we get it, we'll certainly start to analyze it.
No, but these bills and these bailouts seem to be messy every time they get put together. There's always somebody who is holding it up because they want something funded that they couldn't get funded during the normal times. So do you think that's appropriate for legislators to start throwing things in there? For example, in the big stimulus, when they started throwing money at the Kennedy Center and they wanted items for their new Green Deal and other pet projects. Do you think that maybe it's time that legislators, whether it be at state or federal levels, stop playing games and just focus on the one thing that matters at hand here? Because I feel like the people are getting sick of game playing overall and it being a partisan war as opposed to an American war where we're just declaring war on this pandemic as well as the economic consequences and trying to find a way together.
Well, I think it's actually pretty amazing that there have been 4 bills that have passed on a bipartisan basis within the last month. The last one not being signed just yet, but I think that is pretty amazing that there has been this bipartisanship. So certainly the product that came out on the last one had some problems. Now I understand that a lot of the companies that were publicly traded are being told to send the money back. So they're certainly passing a complicated bill like this is not easy. It's called making sausage and in our world, and it's a difficult, messy process. That said, I think that there certainly are some things that have been passed that are going to be very helpful. The extended unemployment benefits that were passed in the last one, people just began signing up for those last week. That hopefully will translate into approximately $600 a week retroactively to the week that you were signed up. And this actually includes a lot of people who are not normally eligible for unemployment. And of course, we all know the $1,200 stimulus, that those checks are starting to go out to people who had direct deposit available. So there have been a lot of good things that have come as this legislation, but there obviously needs to be more. I heard quoted the other day that 4,100 businesses in Wisconsin were eligible to get some of the SBA money, and actually the amount that was borrowed was a little bit higher than the national average. But there's certainly a lot of cases here in Kenosha that I've talked to of people who have applied for it, and maybe they applied a little later than it took before they ran out of money, or that there was other problems. But hopefully some of those kinks have been ironed out in this new bill.
Sure, definitely. I hope that they do get ironed out. What about on the state level? What kind of bills are you looking at? What type of agenda is being pushed legislatively to make sure that we're doing everything we can as a state to protect our state's small businesses and their employees?
Well, as you probably know, both the Speaker and the Majority Leader in the Senate I take that back. The Senate, I believe, is going to meet one more time in regular session. But the Speaker had declared that we were out of session a couple months ago, and we have met once since then, virtually actually. And I'll tell you a funny story about that, if there is anything funny about this. But for about a week and a half, I was afraid that that something would happen with the computer or the system, and I would not be eligible. Somehow, I would not be able to vote on what may have been one of the most important bills that we will pass this session. And everything was going pretty good. About an hour and a half into the meeting, all of a sudden my screen went blank, right as we were getting probably within 10 to 15 minutes from the vote. And so I got a technical support person on the line, and she was obviously working from home. I could hear her baby cooing in the background. And she was very calm and cool and collected. And I said, "You got to get me back on here. I can't miss this vote." So 6 or 7 minutes later, which seemed like about 6 or 7 hours later, I was able to get back on and and participate in that vote. So in that particular bill,
it's a darn good thing you're not a conspiracy theorist.
Yes, I know. I think that it was technical difficulty on my Wi-Fi on this end. Actually, is what I came up with. But on that bill, we had to do several different things to be eligible for the federal money. $15 million, $150 million quarterly in increased Medicaid money, and also $2 billion with a B in terms of like overall federal money that's coming into, as a result of one of those bills that we were talking about earlier. The state will be receiving $2 billion to help us through this crisis. So in order to do that, we had to pass some legislation by the end of that week. I think we voted on a Tuesday. I think the governor signed it on a Thursday, and we obviously were able to accomplish that. But so one of the things that we did in that particular bill was for this particular time, we ended what's called the waiting week for unemployment, where
correct.
The waiting week is essentially something that for the last several years, I think it was 2011, that the legislature and Governor Walker at the time signed in a week where the first week that you were laid off, that you would not be eligible for unemployment. And that, according to the federal legislation that we needed in order to get those resources, we needed to change that for at least this period of time, which we did. And we also made some modifications in terms of giving the governor some abilities to kind of manage the crisis.
Of course, the requirement to be actively looking for work has been removed as well, correct?
Yes, for this period of time. And relatively short period of time, I believe that those come off. I know the waiting week comes off the first week in February, but there were several small changes. It was a kind of a big bill, very technical bill. One disappointment in the bill, which you may have read about in the Kenosha News, but part of the bill was to allow first responders, our police, our fire, our medical people who are impacted with COVID-19, that they would be allowed to apply for workers' compensation, to receive workers' compensation if it happened while they were working. And there was what was called a technical amendment that was added at the very end that certainly weakened that part of the legislation, that makes it very much harder for our first responders to successfully claim those benefits. So that's something that certainly we are hoping that there will be another session yet before before the next full legislative session, which of course begins in January. And we of course don't control that, but we'll see if the speaker and the majority leader are willing to take up some of the other issues that as we go along, that we know that there will be more legislation needed during this crisis.
Sure. And I think there's going to be. As the facts change about what we know, for example, yesterday they had the random sampling in New York of 3,000 people. Right before that, they had some samplings in California. And what we're finding out is that there are dramatically higher numbers of people actually infected than we originally thought. So as you talked earlier about the fact that we had a bunch of new cases, we've had a bunch of new confirmed cases. And it's my concern, and I think the concern of a lot of people, that those numbers are skewed because cases are becoming confirmed, but there's a lot more cases out there of asymptomatic people. And this data can be taken one of two ways. One is it's a lot scarier out there. There's a lot more people infected, and therefore we have to stay in place even longer. But the flip side of that argument is that this is, even though the death toll overall is high, the death rate for this virus itself is actually much smaller than we thought. And we look at, for example, right now, we have, if you look at deaths per million people across the world, you see that, for example, Sweden has far less deaths per million people than several other countries surrounding them that have similar populations. We have 9 states that do not have shelter in place orders in effect at all, and yet they have far fewer deaths per million than other states that are populated at about the same density. So I'm talking about apples to apples comparison. Obviously, you're not going to compare Iowa with California or New York, but you can compare Iowa and Arkansas with, say, Missouri and Oklahoma. What do you think of that data, and is that data worth looking into? Because if shelter in place works, and it's actually keeping the spread and containing it, that's a good thing. But if it's actually doing nothing to contain the spread, are we harming our economy for absolutely no good reason? Or is there a chance that we're harming our economy for no good reason? Because I think a lot of us are waiting to see data that shows that what we're doing is actually saving lives. Because if it isn't saving lives, we're actually contributing to the misery later on down the line.
Well, I think that everybody is recognizing that we are definitely saving lives. In terms of the data on Sweden, I encourage you to take a look at that, because Sweden, as you probably know, was one of the few countries that in Scandinavia that kind of was going a different way, and they did not shelter in place.
Correct.
And their deaths now are nearly double their neighbors, nearly double Norway, nearly double some of their other neighbors. And so I think that Sweden actually does have a tale to tell, but I think it's different than than the early numbers that you looked at, because they are experiencing.
Well, they're at approximately 213. They're at approximately 213 deaths per million. The Netherlands next door is at 250 deaths per million, which is one of the neighboring countries. The UK is at 287. France, Italy,
what is Norway?
Norway. All right. Well, let's take a look at Norway here, because that's. All right, Norway is at 37.
37, similar country compared to 200 and something. Let me just talk about testing a little bit.
Okay.
Testing, I think that, testing has always been a problem early on. There's no reason to talk about the past much in this situation.
Sure. What can we do to get the testing done now?
We know that we were behind the 8 ball in testing early on. And we are really, most people probably don't have any idea of this, but we are testing more than 10,000 people a day in Wisconsin right now, with a goal of 85,000 per day.
Now, are we testing asymptomatic? Are we testing asymptomatic people yet? You can just go and get a test, or do you still have to meet criteria to be tested?
You still have to meet some criteria. I think that you have to have something that looks like a symptom. You can't just walk in and say, I'm curious as to whether or not I have antibodies. But we may at some point be able to test almost anybody who wants a test. Certainly we're not there yet, but 85,000 a week is a big number. And we've had 3 great companies kind of step up to allow us to increase that testing. Epic and Madison, Exact Science, and ProMega have all stepped up and are really, I think that Exact Sciences is allowing an additional 20,000 tests per week. So,
but if we're testing only sick people, are really getting an accurate number of how many people are infected?
Well, no, of course, we're not getting a total accurate number in terms of how many people are infected. Certainly, with that amount of testing, but we know that the National Guard has been doing spot testing of everybody in different locations, and really amazing numbers of National Guard people, if I can find it in my notes here, have been helpful in this whole process in the last few weeks. But testing is obviously critical, and we have to continue to make advances in that. Unfortunately, we have not really received testing equipment. We received a lot of other equipment from the federal government, but my understanding is that that still lags. But we are certainly making big strides right now. As I said, we're at about 10,000 a day, and that's to go to 85 per week. So,
sure.
We're making progress in testing, and certainly, I think that it's important. I think it's necessary to have a better grasp on this before we start sending people back into whatever's going to be the new normal. And let me just talk about that a little bit. Certainly not a scientific study, but I saw a Facebook post, Kenosha's Facebook post the other day that they had about 200 respondents, and The question was if bars and restaurants were open today, whether or not um, you would go out. And
Right.
it was right around 80% of the people in that post said no, that they would not feel safe going out at this point. And the last thing
And I
that
would probably
this
be in that. I
economy
would
can
probably be in
take.
that camp. I wouldn't feel safe going out, and and
Yep.
and and I think that 80% is probably an accurate number there. So the question is, when it comes to that, are we are we going to get to a point where that becomes a personal choice again?
I don't. There's no question that we will get to that point. There's no question then if it is May 26th, that things go back to the new normal, or phase two, or earlier. And the governor has said many times that that it could be, and he certainly hopes that it is earlier than that.
Sure.
The new normal will begin, and there may not be as many bar stools at the bar, and there may not be as many tables in the restaurant, and waiters and waitresses might be wearing masks, and the menus might be disposable. There might, be a lot of things different in the new normal.
What if we never
Um,
meet the criteria? What if a year from now we're not seeing spikes, but we're not seeing the decreases in number of new cases either? How long do you think we can survive, or how long should we go? Let's say we just keep plugging along at the pace we're at now. Goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. We don't really have a spike, but we really don't meet the criteria for going back to normal. How long can we stay in a pattern like this before we just have to start taking risks?
well, it will be a risk when we go back. And um, from my reading of the virus, everybody anticipates that, and New York is already starting to see it. I saw a graph today where their numbers are starting to go down. Hopefully, we don't see that big of a spike here in Kenosha or in Wisconsin, although we're obviously still continuing to see an increased number of cases, up 52 since Monday of confirmed cases. Uh, so we know that science tells us that viruses do not go exponentially up forever. At some point, these are going to level out. And hopefully, of course, that's sooner than later. I anticipate that, hopefully that we are back by the 26th. And if hopefully the numbers, can start to go down throughout the state. And the other thing that the governor has said is that he is certainly going to take a look at a regional approach. Some parts of the state that have experienced a lot lower numbers than what we have in southeastern Wisconsin. Maybe it may make some sense to do something different there.
Now
But I don't.
we were told initially that the whole reason for sheltering in place was to not to prevent deaths, because that actually can't happen with the virus, but so that we wouldn't overwhelm our healthcare system and have more deaths than necessary because too many people got too sick too fast, and we didn't have bed capacity. That ended up not being the case in New York at all, not even by a long shot. It's going to not end up being the case here. So is our sheltering in place
Well,
really
I don't.
just spreading the same number of deaths over a longer period of time? Or is it actually reducing the total number of deaths that you think we end up having?
Oh, I don't think that there's any question. There's certainly no question in my mind that this has reduced the number of deaths. The more people that we have out in the public catching the virus, going for a week or longer, continuing to contaminate people without even knowing that they are symptomatic, there is no question that we are saving lives. The estimate that I've heard, right now it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 million people. Um, or 50,000 people, 50,000 people in the country have died. My understanding is that, most people think that number would be more than double by now, and we would certainly see a lot more hotspots than what we're currently seeing. So there's no question in my mind that we are
More than
safe.
double by now. But my question is, at the end of the day, when this whole thing is over, are we reducing the total number of deaths, or are we just spreading it out over a longer period of time? Because it was my understanding that flattening the curve was just spreading it out over a longer period of time, so we didn't overwhelm the system and have people dying for lack of care. And we're not in a position where there's a crisis where there's a lack of care, because we have at least flatten that curve. So my question is, at the end, when we get to the finish line here, do you think that and let's use Sweden again for an example.
Mhm.
You said that they have more deaths. Do you think that the other countries will catch up over a longer period of time and they'll level off sooner because they just got hit more at once. That this virus is a tragedy, and it is killing people. And I don't want people to think that. And I know there are deniers out there that deny this happens. I'm not one of them. I do question the science, and I question the procedures and whether or not it's going to save lives overall, because I think that's an important question to have. But do you think there'll be a leveling off from the places that had a shelter in place and not a shelter in place, where it ends up being we lost the same number of people, but we lost them over a shorter period of time as opposed to over a longer period of time? Because those are some of the arguments that I'm hearing from I guess you could say contrarian scientists, people that are in the scientific community but have a contrarian point of view.
No, there is absolutely no question in my mind that we're saving lives not only in Wisconsin but all throughout the United States and all throughout the countries that are sheltering in place. When you look at some of the countries like South Korea, for example, and some of the countries that kind of had enforced shelter in place and different things in place, and compare that to Italy, I think that there is absolutely no question in my mind, at least, that that this is saving lives. The other thing, in terms of making sure that we overwhelm our medical system, and that apparently has just barely held in New York, and thankfully it seems like there is a flattening of the curve there, undoubtedly as a result of
we built
sheltering in place.
We built a capacity based on projections of hundreds of thousands of deaths by this time, and and that was with sheltering in place factored in. And yes, we've had a lot of deaths, but we've had a fraction of the projected amount. So
and that's obviously a good. That's wrong. Obviously a good thing.
It's a very good thing. That's a good thing to be wrong about. Don't get me wrong.
I'm not so sure that it wasn't underestimated just how serious people would take sheltering in place, and as a result of people taking sheltering in place, that it hasn't, it has certainly been successful. All that being said, in terms of the recent Badger bounce back, we've got kind of a few things going on that are inching us back into whatever the new normal is going to be. Today it's not a very nice day out there, but golfing is back in place as of
golfing
today,
is back in place, but the dog parks are being golfing is back in place, but the dog parks in Kenosha County are being closed. What do you think of that?
I just heard that there was a couple of cases that the CDC reported a couple of days ago of transmission in animals. That was the first I heard about that. I wasn't part of that decision. I'm not sure exactly why they did. Interestingly enough, I think that we're seeing just open there. So I think that the jury's still out on that. I know that I don't have my dogs quarantined because they're constantly telling me that they want to go in and out. But and the other thing that
is it okay to be outside and do things outside in Kenosha County right now, as long as we're not gathering in groups?
Oh yeah, absolutely. People are walking downtown. Not a lot of them. People are walking in my neighborhoods. There's a lot of people have dogs in my neighborhoods. One thing that's been a fact of life, and since I've been sheltering in place here, is that I will get a good walk in with both of my dogs every day, and that's been like my main break in terms of between all the other work that I have actually to do on this. But and also, we at the Southwest Library, we have pick up today starting today, in terms of if you want to call and get a book reserved, they'll come and drop it off to you. So that's a good thing. And I'm somebody who likes to go out to the neighborhood pub, the neighborhood restaurant, and socialize as much as anybody. And I'm looking forward to that day. But the last thing that we want to do is do that early and have even a bigger spike as a result of it, and then scare people into not going out. That would do nothing. There's nothing worse that could be done to our economy than to make people think that when they go out, that it's not going to be safe.
Certainly, and that is important. That's just as important, that when people do, when we do get through this and we do have a reasonable degree of safety, that people feel safe, because if they don't feel safe, it doesn't matter how safe it actually is. People aren't going to go back out there into the workplace. They're not going to go back out there into the marketplace. They're not going to spend money, and we're going to continue to stagnate for a much longer period of time. So that's definitely something that I think that people appreciate. And I appreciate you coming on, Tod. I know that you are an honest steward of the people in your district here. You're not a what's the word I'm looking for? You're not a demagogue. You're not a party elite. You care about the people here and in your area. So I sincerely believe that you're being sincere in having your constituents' best interests at heart. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking to some of the points that the other side has. And I hope that you'll consider moving forward the information on both sides, so that if we stagnate for longer than we have to, and we see that it's not actually making the overall situation better, that there's room for rethinking this, because I do believe this is a fluid situation, not one where we know the facts. In fact, we know very little of the facts. We're learning as we go along, and it's important that as we reevaluate facts, if we realize that we were wrong at some point in time in the past, that we give ourselves permission to have been wrong and change as the facts we know change, because this is a new thing. We didn't have enough testing before. We could blame somebody, or we could just realize this is something that didn't exist 6 months ago. How easy is it to roll something out to 350 million people in an entire country to test for something that didn't exist last year, that didn't exist 6 months ago? How easy is it to come up with treatment protocols? How easy is it to come up with vaccines? It's not easy at all. And I feel like we have an all hands on deck approach by people on both sides of the political aisle and all the people in general in this country. But there's still a little bit of finger pointing going on behind the scenes. And I think the more that ends, and the more people stop blaming and just start saying, hey, let's get this fixed, the better off we're going to be as a nation at the end. Because the only real place that I see that we should be placing blame is on the Chinese government, not just for letting this get out, because accidents happen, but for concealing the nature of how it got out, when it got out, for doing things like banning travel inside their own country, but letting people fly out of Wuhan to other parts of the world. I think they've done some serious damage to us here. And at a certain point in time, we as a nation need to band together and make sure that there's a reckoning for that, whether it be in the form of lawsuits and punishing them monetarily, definitely in insourcing a great deal of our supply chain, because we've realized how vulnerable of a country we are.
Well, we certainly need to do something about our supply chain. It is criminal that the vast majority of our medicine is actually manufactured in China. A lot of important things that we need in the United States, there's no reason why we're not building them here. I totally agree on that, and I agree on the fact that we could look in terms of we know that the government knew as early as November, December, certainly January, that this pandemic was coming, and we could argue all day about exactly what could and should have been done at that point, instead of waiting until March or April. But that doesn't get us where we need to do.
It doesn't. But when a foreign government locks the WHO, locks our scientists out of our country, kicks our journalists out of our country, and based on the only evidence we have, our top infectious disease physician is going out there in public in January and in February saying this really isn't going to have a big effect on our country. You realize that hindsight is 2020. We saw this coming, but we didn't see it coming. We saw this as something that was going to affect the rest of the world. And then end of January, beginning of February, we started looking at restrictions of travel from China to this country. And of course, by then it was just too late.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Ralph, for having me on. I think it's been an interesting conversation.
It has.
Certainly, as you said, this is a fluid situation. I'm sure we'll have something new and different to talk about next week. If you want me back on, I'll be pleased to do that. I would just like to end with this.
Absolutely.
I would just like to end with this, because I know that these times are difficult on a lot of people. A lot of people don't have, family to be with, or people don't have access to their friends like they'd want to. And I know that a lot of people are having a hard personal time with all of this. And I would just like to leave with a number, 1-800-985-5990. If you're thinking that you need somebody to talk to, this is a crisis hotline, and I would encourage you to give them a call. I would also encourage everybody to. I would also encourage everybody to take a look at the new county website. They have a lot of good information, and I would also encourage everybody to get a pen out and either call my office or go ahead and call my office and say that you would like a copy of my e-newsletter that we put out every week. In fact, as soon as I get off this line in a couple of minutes, I'm going to proof that for this week's edition. But we have a lot of important information. This is kind of mostly just on coronavirus. But you can call my number 608-266-0455 and get on my e-newsletter list. I've got 3,000 or 4,000 people on it, and I think it provides a lot of good information. But thanks for having me on today.
Certainly, and I'll make sure that I put those numbers on our show link, and that I put it on the on the video rebroadcast of the show as well, so people can see it. Tod, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I look forward to getting some updates from you on a regular basis as the information changes. So okay. Thank you again, and stay safe. Good luck, and we'll be touching base again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ralph.
Thank you, Tod.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And again, that was Tod Ohnstad, 65th Assembly District Representative for Kenosha County to the state of Wisconsin. And we really do appreciate him coming on.